In the year 0 AC, the world was blessed with the calving of Aoife MacDoilith. Having survived the cataclysm of Hefferton, the young calfling would go on to accomplish feats the likes of which had never before been observed in the great land of Eskean. Following her ascent to the throne in 168 AC, the Queen of the South had the great citadel in Hefferton repaired for use as her seat of power. From here, she would go on to conduct many meetings with her inner council and lay out the groundwork for the creation of what would come to be known as the Kingdom of Loiwyn, though in this case it would be overseen by a glorious queen. 2 years later, the kingdom would officially be declared, and under the rule of Queen Aoife I, the land would prosper. Towns and other settlements sprung up along the southern coast. Like clusters of mushrooms following an autumn dew, they began to multiply, bustling with life and merriment. From this point ever onward, the queen would be known as the Golden Heifer, being the last known member of her species yet living. It was widely known that even the small folk on the outskirts of Loiwyn were well fed, and this resulted in an explosion of births across the land, the air filling with the cries of fattened newborns. The first hurdle on the Queen Heifer's holy and righteous quest was the Decaulihoin mountain clansmen. Their leader's name has since been erased from the history books. However, the crimes they committed against the realm of Loiwyn are still taught to noble children in the modern day. The citizens of the Schisma mountain range began to take notice of the glorious and fertile lands to the southeast. One by one, villages and hamlets were left abandoned, their inhabitants fleeing for greener pastures, so to speak. This infuriated the Decaulihoin king, and in the year 182 AC, he sent a small number of his forces to burn and pillage towns along the border between Loiwyn and Ragnarok. Once the news of these horrific attacks reached the golden ears of the gracious Heifer, it was said that a frown so frightening appeared on her beautiful face that the nobles and esquires of her court felt a dread deep in their hearts, for they knew her wrath would be both instant and terrible. The royal troops were quickly mustered and began to march north with the fury of Einar on his horse-drawn chariot. Upon reaching the shores of Lake Harmony at a small town called Aestus, the army began to set up camps and dig trenches. Unbeknownst to them, the forces of Decaulihoin had arrived a day prior and had laid an ambush for the Queen Heifer's troops. This did not deter the royal forces, however, and it was said that they laughed in the face of this cowardice. Quickly launching a counterattack, they fought both expertly and courageously, felling the enemy's captain within the first few minutes of battle, thus routing their remaining foes. Shortly after, a castle was erected in commemoration of the great victory at the Battle of Aestus, and a memorial was erected in honor of the few that fell during the initial ambush. Following this, the Queen Heifer would go on to launch a campaign against the Decaulihoin king and his misguided slaves. And so began the 20 Years' War, a bloody decades-long clash that saw the Ragnarok region reduced to rubble. This ensured that the Mountain King could not and would not dare to continue his heinous assaults against the people of Loiwyn. Many years later, in 240 AC, the Queen declared her intentions to construct the most beautiful city in the world. She describes to her royal court a vision that she once had, detailing the creation of an incredible city made from crystal and the finest of marble rock that protruded from the shores and cliffs of the Emerald Bay. Plans begin, and the Cloudrest Council is formed in order to make further preparations for the construction of the city. (256 AC). The land is once again plagued by war. 6 factions across Eskean begin to do combat with one another. The main catalyst for the war was the ever-looming threat of the Queen Heifer's power to the south. The dwarves of Durumdir, the bandit clans of the west, the horse lords of Kraken, The elves of Arian and the cult of Pigeon all convened to see what could be done about the Golden Heifer's rapidly expanding realm. With the dissolution of the Decalihoin dynasty and their pact with the kingdom of Loiwyn, the other races and realms became extremely worried that in time they too would be forced to submit to the might of the last Heifer. However, their doom was sealed when they could not come to any agreement, which led to a 6-year-long conflict, the War of the Six. The Holy Queen of Loiwyn and her most trusted generals, Sir Edmundus Roshine and Sir Stephen de Breen, saw to it that Loiwyn would prevail, and through sheer cunning and bravery, they crushed any and all opposition over the course of the war. Lord Robertos de Cowleyhoin, however, disgraced himself through his inability to stop the dwarves from sealing the great stone doors of their city and allowing them to escape the Heifer's wrath. To this day, they have not opened the doors, and dwarves have become as rare a sight as heiferfolk in Eskean. Having repelled the other factions of the land and conquering their territories, Queen Aoiffe I turned her attention back to what she felt most important: the prospering of Loiwyn. A post-war tax fell on the other realms in Eskean, which assisted the royal treasury immensely. However, the Queen had another vision of a land far across the summer sea and sent Sir Edmundus Roshine to lead an expedition along with 500 knights. They returned with hordes of priceless treasures. Although Sir Edmundus fell ill on his journey home and passed away shortly after making port in Diluvium in 295 AC, marking the end of one of the greatest knights the realm had ever seen. The Golden Heifer would erect a large statue in his likeness along the shores of Diluvium, immortalizing him forever. 4 years later, the glorious queen had a foreign sorceress brought in to cast an incredibly powerful spell on the Emerald Bay. Curiously, despite official accounts detailing the sorceress's heritage to be Hokanese, many eyewitnesses described her to be of Escalish origin. Nonetheless, the queen was most pleased with her work as she raised large crystalline foundations that pierced the clouds and cast ferocious shadows over the former coastal village of Scummin. Over the course of the next 32 years, the remainder of the city would be constructed by the Queen Heifer's subjects. Miraculously, not a single person in the vicinity of the Emerald Bay aged a day during the time it took to build the fabled city of Cloudrest. This was one of the Golden Heifer's final gifts to the world and her loyal servants. The sorceress she commissioned had also placed an enchantment on the bay, granting presumed eternal youth for all who chose to live in or around the most beautiful city in the world. Unfortunately, a dark force was working to undermine the rule of Queen Aoiffe I. Robertos de Cowleyhoin, now referred to as the Callous Dog or Caldog, had enacted a diabolical plan to possess the alluring body of the queen. Since his banishment, he had begun studying the vile arts. Through his dastardly methods, he effectively took control of all Eskean under the guise of the Golden Heifer. This would come to be known as one of the darkest periods in the history of Eskean, sparking yet another conflict. And without the clairvoyance and wisdom of the Holy Queen, the world appeared to be slipping into an irreversible darkness. That was until the winter of 350 AC, when High Priest John Murphys and Divine Champion Aaron de Breen managed to raise an army in rebellion against the possessed Heifer, sadly resulting in her death, but also mercifully freeing her from an even worse fate. Just like her predecessor Bovina, Queen Aoiffe Macdoileth, first of her name, would rise to the position of godhood following her demise, ensuring that she would continue to watch over her beloved subjects and cast her grace upon the lands forevermore.